Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for this special Winter Warmers Talks, Speakers Corner's 150th anniversary. My name is Helena and I will be your host for this evening. So we at Zoom Through History, we are delighted to be collaborating with the Royal Parks to bring history to life in this very special way and to celebrate this amazing anniversary of Speakers Corner. Now, you may know the Royal Parks is a charity that looks after 8 parks in London, and these are Hyde Park, Kensington Gardens, the Green Park, St James's Park, Regent's Park with Primrose Hill, Bushy Park, Greenwich Park and Richmond Park, plus Brompton Cemetery and Victoria Tower Gardens as well. Now, the Royal Parks' aim is to engage as many people as possible with the rich heritage that the parks have to offer, keeping them free and accessible so that everyone can enjoy the wellbeing benefits, and also to protect and improve the parks for the wonderful biodiversity that they have there. Now, just a reminder to everyone that this talk is being recorded so that it can be uploaded and accessed via the Royal Parks YouTube channel for you to enjoy again at a later date. So names and any faces on camera may appear in this recording. Now, we're really glad that you could join us for this evening's talk, which is free and open to all. The Royal Parks is a charity, so whilst this talk is of course free to join, the Royal Parks would greatly appreciate any donations in support of their work to look after these amazing spaces. So we'll pop a link in the chat if you would like to donate. Now, without further ado, let's begin our celebration of Speakers Corner. So Speakers Corner was founded in 1872. In Hyde Park, and it is of course one of the Royal Park's iconic outdoor spaces. Now, since it was founded, it has been used as a platform by countless individuals and organisations. It's a way that you can speak freely and be listened to. And today, if you go to Speakers Corner on a Sunday morning, you'll often find people talking and debating the matters of the day. Speakers Corner is famous throughout the world and has brought people from all over the world to speak there. Now, amongst the most well-known speakers are, of course, the famous suffragette family, the Pankhursts. We have Emmeline, the family matriarch, and her daughters Adela, Sylvia, and Christabel. Now, Emmeline Pankhurst is actually buried at Brompton Cemetery, which is under the Royal Park's care. So if you took a visit to the cemetery today, you may even see purple, white and green flowers left by mourners leaving their respects and giving a nod to the colours chosen by the suffragettes. Tonight, however, we will be in the company of Emmeline's famous daughter, Christabel. Tonight, we'll have a rare opportunity to step back in time to listen to Christabel Pankhurst and her fight for the fundamental right of women to get the vote. So all cameras and microphones should be off for the duration of Christabel's talk, which should last around 30 minutes. And then after this, you'll have the opportunity to ask Christabel some questions via the Q&A box. And depending on how many questions there are, we may unfortunately not be able to get through them all, but we will do our best. So without further ado then, cast your minds back to London in 1906 and allow me to introduce you to Christabel Pankhurst.
Good evening. Terribly sorry I have been somewhat delayed. Well, yes, thank you all for making the time to join. Oh, it's auspicious indeed. Thank you, thank you. For my records, we will begin shortly. May I have a show of hands, just so I can note down how many people have been to a WSPU, that's Women's Social and Political Union meeting before now, just by a show of hands. Wonderful. You must understand, ladies and gentlemen, it is quite unusual for us to be before gentlemen. We do not normally admit them to our meetings of the WSPU, but today we meet under the auspices of a different organisation. I believe that Helena has given me a fulsome introduction, for which I am most grateful, but nevertheless, my name is Christabel Pankhurst, and my cause, my message is clear: to obtain the parliamentary vote for women on the same basis as men by any means necessary. But I think perhaps you already knew that. I believe you know that I am to speak before you. Is it perhaps the case that you saw the name Pankhurst and thought of my famous mother, Emmeline, who I must apologise for, she cannot be here tonight? The Pankhurst name has gained something of a reputation in recent months. Perhaps you saw it and connected it with the heroic deeds of the suffragettes, a term new coined for us by the Daily Mail. We quite enjoy it. They did not mean it to be a compliment. But evermore it is being connected to our just and noble cause. Of course, equally, it is possible that you hear the name Pankhurst or the term suffragette and something entirely different is conjured in your mind. Marauding bands of militant women acting in most unladylike fashion, you know, doing the unthinkable, haranguing politicians, running around, attacking letterboxes, smashing shop windows, slashing paintings, generally coming out in the world and making a nuisance of themselves, spoiling everyone's day. I wouldn't really do that. I did see, though, some of you nodding that is what you thought of us. Found that interesting. Whatever you do think of the Pankhurst name or of the suffragettes, I have come here to speak before you all. And that is what I intend to do. I have prepared some words. We have some important meetings coming up, and some of these words will be used in those. I will be making notes. You will be, if you will, my first audience. To speak. That is something that defines our society. Nay, our species, does it not? To use one's voice to communicate our thoughts and beliefs. That capacity has enabled us to form successful communities. Those communities have then gone on to become nations, empires even, that have taken over the globe. And part of the reason why we have been successful in this is that we can discuss and contemplate our form of governance. And yet, upon this sceptred isle, half the population does not have this voice. For in the walls of Parliament, a woman's voice cannot be heard. And I mean that both literally and metaphorically. So while we are expected to pay taxes, follow the laws, and contribute to the successful running of an empire, we get no say in any of it. We are denied, that most human of things, a voice. And yet, if you listen, our voices have been speaking for the best part of a century. We have simply not been heard. Perhaps it is the case that you think our suffragettes have popped up at the turn of the century, some fixture of the zeitgeist of the Edwardian society, and I will grant you that while the WSPU certainly only was officially founded some 3 years ago in 1903, the roots of our movement date much further back. I mean, consider, if you will, the text of Mary Wollstonecraft, A Vindication of the Rights of Women from 1792. And then we have also 1832, when the first women's suffrage petition was brought to Parliament by Mary Smith. Back then, of course, the vast majority of men did not have the vote either. It would be indeed some 30 years before the second Reform Bill would pass, and that would change the face of the electorate by allowing working men to vote for the first time. What that all means is that for 80 years, we women have gathered in small rooms. First, they were lit by candles, then by gas, and I am sure in the not too distant future, they will be lit with electricity. In those rooms, we have talked and listened, debated and petitioned, watched and waited as the inexorable march of time continues on, down the track towards modernity. We have seen laws change, come and go, all of which have served to enfranchise more and more men, make the voice of men louder, but we are still without a voice. Now, I wouldn't be much of a law scholar if I didn't point out that in this year of 1906, all men don't have the vote either, so I must make a note of that. It would be a rather important omission, I think, in this case, if I should leave it out. But the men who are excluded are those from the poorest, most marginalised parts of society. So thus, it means that we women are equally marginalised. I must ask you, would it not be a fairer, indeed more modern society if every mouth could indeed be a mouthpiece? However, the great irony lies in the very cornerstone of our women's social and political union. Because using your voice simply does not work. We have, after all, sat in small rooms discussing and talking for 80 years, and it has done nothing. Perhaps you know of a contrary organisation to our own, led by Mrs. Millicent Fawcett, known as the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, nicknamed the suffragists, non-militant men and women who, for some reason, believe that if they are just patient enough, just say maybe the right words, that one day the establishment will prick up their ears and listen. But how can they listen if they do not believe you have a voice? It is deeds and not words that will change their minds. It's simply been going on for too long for us to keep doing the same thing. And so perhaps now you will understand why we do what we do. Might I ask you to, by show of hands, tell me if you believe we are justified in what we do? And if you believe we are not? Well, Did I not say that we were preparing for an auspicious meeting? I have it on good authority that our dear member, Annie Kenny, is soon to be delivered out of her prison. For yes, perhaps it is the greatest sacrifice for our cause that Miss Kenny, a passionate and devoted member, has given up her freedom and is currently being held at His Majesty's pleasure in Holloway. For, as my mother says, we are not here because we are lawbreakers, but for our efforts to become lawmakers. We must act above the law if we are to change how this country is run. In fact, Miss Kenny and I were both imprisoned for several days last year. Imagine the scene, if you will. A dry, dusty old meeting room filled with men talking, pale-faced, grey, boring. You saying the same usual things of the Liberal Party matter, questioning each other, hubbub, hubbub, rhubarb, rhubarb, when from the crowd up spouts a lady's voice. Will the Liberal Party grant votes for women? And then another voice. Will the Liberal Party grant votes for women? The same again. Will the Liberal Party grant votes for women? Will the Liberal Party grant votes for women? On and on we went. The assembled men were quite surprised. They had never seen the like. Women just calling out and refusing to stop. They were quite at a loss of what to do, so much so that they called upon the constabulary, who were also much amazed. And when they arrived and tried to stop us, we refused. Indeed, we struck out, we hit and we kicked. Indeed, I spat in a policeman's face, which of course led to my arrest. They attempted to make me pay a fine, but I refused and was imprisoned. You may have heard this. We cannot make any orderly protest because we have not the means whereby citizens may do such a thing. We have not a vote. And so long as we have not a vote, we must be disorderly. When we have that, you will not see us in the police courts. But so long as we have not votes, this will happen. I very much enjoy that passage. I will include it in my next speech. I'm sure you will know that the case of Miss Kenny and myself quite shocked the nation. You will, of course, know it if you frequent the local newspapers. And I am quite proud that these first militant actions brought the name suffragette into the public consciousness. My mother was so proud, which I'm sure when you think about it seems an odd thing. You in the audience, if you happen to be in possession of children, one would assume that you would not find pride if they were to be located in a prison. But it changed something. Suddenly, we were feared. Before this, our ideas had been pooh-poohed. Even the late Queen, Queen Victoria, thought we were foolish. Our ideas were folly, despite her own sex and elevated station. Well, now, after these actions, we are no longer seen as fools, but as wild women. If I was, though, to look to the future, I must say that the more shocking and more militant that we become, it is to be expected that the police in response will become more brutal and more ruthless. I must make it clear that we never set out to maim or kill anyone. That is important. Occasionally, regrettably, there will be some collateral damage, but that is not our intention. We seek only to attack and damage properties, and especially public property. And you may ask why? Well, if we are not respected as members of this society, why should we respect social property? But I will say again, we shall never set out to kill or maim anyone. Of course. It would be impossible for us to police the behaviour of every woman who might take up for our cause. It is unrealistic to expect that we would be able to tell any woman that she may not do something if she deems it necessary, but on account of the WSPU, it will never be our intention. The same cannot be said, though, for police officers, I'm sure. And for this reason, ladies amongst us, we must learn to defend ourselves. And for that reason, I shall refer you all to Mrs. Garrard. And many of you, I'm sure, know Mrs. Garrard is a wonderful, loyal member of our union. And she also happens to be an expert in Japanese jiu-jitsu. This is a martial art, and it's a very special martial art because what it allows a person to do, no matter how diminutive you may be, is it allows you to use your opponent's weight against them. So say, for example, you have some rough brute trying to attack you. Well then, as he comes at you, you adopt the correct stance and you are able to throw him over your shoulder or over your hip. And thus he is upon the floor. There are, of course, other forms of martial art. There's one, I believe, called bar-titsu, where you can also incorporate some punches, some kicks, and some stick work if you should so choose. But Mrs. Garrow, she is a force to be reckoned with. Do you know, I once heard tell that she used this technique, this Japanese jiu-jitsu, on a police officer. She was at a rally, and he sought to prevent her from doing what she was about. And so she threw him over her shoulder. And in his surprise, he lost sight of her while he was regathering himself, finding his hat, his whistle, his truncheon or some such. She managed to escape into the crowd. But what I have not mentioned is that Mrs. Garrow is scarcely 5 feet tall. She is easy to miss, but she is hard to ignore. Indeed, I have spent many an amusing afternoon at Mrs. Garrow's house for her martial arts lessons. It is a wonderful thing because her husband, Mr. Garrow, I think perhaps in the name of verisimilitude, would dress up as a police officer and permit his wife to spend the afternoon tossing him about the room. It's very amusing. Quite a lovely way to spend your time. And on top of that, Mrs. Garrow does make a lovely sponge cake. Of course, I am aware that not everyone shall be able to make their way to Mrs. Garrow's, and thus you may find tools about your home that can be, shall we say, repurposed. Perhaps you might ask your cook if she had one of those small hammers used to break apart toffee, for they do wondrous well when you are trying to break shop windows. So also, I think, getting one of those is preferable to going down to the local tool makers and asking them to make you a construction hammer, which I think may raise eyebrows and also questions. Perhaps you or a member of your household are engaged in the practice of calisthenics, and you use the Indian clubs. I have been told that they are a good match for a police truncheon. Worth being aware. And as I'm sure we all know, ladies and indeed gentlemen, when out and about, 'tis the fashion for us to wear hats, and in the case of ladies, to secure them with hat pins, is it not? Now, of course, my hat is fairly small. It would require only a small hat pin. Nothing to fear there. What kind of a weapon would that be? Well, as we all know, I think, the fashion for hats is growing larger. And with it, the hat pin. In fact, I have seen hat pins some 10 inches long, which quite frankly, would be lethal in the right hands. It was an American president said something along the lines of, it takes a man, no matter how courageous, that he would not wish to be confronted with a woman with a hat pin in her hand and a purpose. A wise words indeed, for I would certainly not like to be confronted with a woman with a hat pin in her hand and a purpose. Time marches on. I would say, though, as amusing as it has been to discuss the use of hat pins in particular, I perhaps would not suggest that we use such a formidable weapon in the cause of suffrage, for as I'm sure we can imagine, a 10-inch hat pin is not necessarily what we should be employing. And all this talk of violence, I have digressed, for one of the purposes of me calling you all here and welcoming you is we have to plan. For in lieu of Miss Kenny's release from prison and in honour of her sacrifice and to celebrate her freedom, we are going to hold a great meeting in which she will come and teach the assembled of her sacrifice and also of what her experience was like in withholding herself and giving up her freedom. In doing so, of course, she was seeking to set women as a whole free. Thus, I must think about where we can hold our meeting. Now, in terms of what we are looking for, we need a place that is open to all, where the masses of our ranks can travel. I have been informed that some 1,000 people from all walks of life intend to come to this most historic meeting. We also must have somewhere that a variety of people can meet. For, of course, while we Pankhursts come from good stock, Miss Kenny is a working class factory girl from a poor family of 12. And besides that, I have heard tell that we may be soon able to number a princess or two amongst our ranks. Yes, indeed. For Princess Sophia Dalip Singh, daughter of the last Maharaja of the Punjab, supports our cause and would join us. Additionally, I'm told Princess Louise also supports the cause, although she does do so in the less militant faction. So the question then becomes, where can we find a place that both princesses and factory girls can come together? If I may be so bold, for a little while now, we have been meeting at the charred stump of oak in the little high corner of Hyde Park. The tree in question marks the place where some 40 or 50 years ago, those same reformers, the ones who sought for all men to be represented and enfranchised, would meet to discuss their plans. I do wonder if they chose that particular place in Hyde Park because of its proximity to the place that was once the site of executions called Tyburn. For, after all, they were mounting up and making important speeches, just as had happened at Tyburn on those more fateful days. Perhaps it is to be expected, but of course the government at that time sought to quash the reformers' intention, and so they locked up the park, banned them from using their site to have their meetings. Well, do you know what the reformers did? They dismantled hundreds of yards of railing to gain access to their park and to their meeting spot. The next year, a crowd of 150,000 people marched on Hyde Park, defied the government ban, and police and troops did nothing to intervene. The reformers had got their spot back. The tree at which they met is now known as Reformers' Tree, and this little corner of Hyde Park became known as Speaker's Corner. In due course, it became to be writ into law too. In 1872, some years after the Reformers' protests and when the Second Reform Bill was passed, another bill passed, the 1872 Parks Regulation Act. This allowed people to have the right to meet and speak freely in this little corner of the park. I say freely, as I'm sure you can imagine. The government did try to intervene where possible to tighten their grip on that freedom. They did make it nearly impossible to practice the freedom of speech that had been won by law. They demanded that you give them 2 days' notice, that you told them the subject that was your intention to speak. They also made you give names and addresses. They prevented you from speaking on a Sunday. In short, it was enough to put anybody off, which I'm sure was half the point. In a way, it reminds me of when they allowed women to vote in local government, as if that was an important milestone, and surely it was, but I feel it was only passed so that they might quash our ultimate desires. Give us a morsel and hope that would satisfy. They want so desperately to keep us in the spheres of the local and the domestic, as if we have no say in the national, in the political. Hopefully, though, as happened with Speaker's Corner, the government will listen and the law will change. I mean, after all, in 1873, so the year after, they changed the law again. Much more freedom there was to speak there, and it has been free to speak there ever since. In fact, to this day, in 1906, there are 2 rules. The person speaking cannot speak in an unsavoury manner, and the crowd assembled must behave themselves. Perhaps, in fact, I should make a note of that. Must be well behaved. Wise to start with that, I think. Over the years, there have been some influential people that have come to speak at Speaker's Corner, and maybe you know of some of them. Engels, Marx, for example, they have that quaint little band of political theory called communism, and they were very popular. Lots of people were influenced by them. There was one chap, now then, that's got me stumped. Little Russian fellow, lived for a time with an Irish family, and so learnt English from them, spoke with a very odd accent, very keen on Marx. Lenin, that was his name. Of course, I do think that we suffragettes are the real legacy of Speaker's Corner. This is one of our meeting places of choice. I mean, it works so very well, for not only is it a wide open space that may gather together the hordes of people that naturally come to hear us speak, but all you need is a little wooden box to stand on. The kind that might have once carried soap. You elevate yourself upon it, and thus you are ready to address the masses. Although, considering the numbers that may attend this next meeting, we may need many, many soapboxes, all stacked one upon another. Indeed, perhaps we have needs to build ourselves a scaffold, although one would hope with an entirely different goal than the scaffolds that were built not far away at Tyburn all those years ago. With Speaker's Corner, you see, we do not need the great lecture theatres of universities, of city halls, of parliamentary chambers, because we know now that our actions are being noticed. Our voices can finally be heard. And at Speaker's Corner, all you need is your voice. The fight is nowhere near over. And I am sure that the authorities will try to stop any activity that we undertake, even if it is speaking at Speaker's Corner, despite what the law might say, that 1873 law. We will, however, fight. We will continue, and we will get what we deserve. For women, once they have got hold of anything, would not let it go. I rather like that. For women, once they have got hold of anything, would not let it go. I'm going to add that to the speech that I intend to write. That's another line to go in for the one at Speaker's Corner. Well, I do hope to see many of you, indeed all of you there, as one of the assembled throng to come and hear our speeches. Although perhaps you will feign a lack of interest, but somehow find yourself strolling through the boulevards of Hyde Park when, no, there happens to be a gathering in the park, and wouldn't you know, we will just pop over and see what it's all about. Whatever brings you that way, we will be glad, of course, to welcome you. For now, though, I think I will stop speaking and give you the opportunity to ask me anything that you wish.
Oh, thank you so much, Christabel, for speaking with us today. So now everybody else, it is over to you. We've got some time to ask Christabel some questions, but please remember that you are talking to Christabel in 1906, so let's not put her off with questions from the future. So all you need to do, if you have a question, is pop it into the Q&A box, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. I do apologise in advance if your question does not get answered. So Christabel, are you ready?
I am indeed.
Fantastic. So let me just open up the Q&A box here. Okay, so first off then, what is the relationship like with your mother and your sisters?
Well, I think if you were to ask Adela and Sylvia, they would say that I am mother's favourite. And they would be right. But there is a reason for that, you see. Mother and I are aligned, not just in the end goal, but also in the journey to get there. Sylvia and Adela have a mind that we can work with political parties, that we can politicise the movement. They will wish to include men. They seek to make friends with people whose sole aim is not the case of suffrage and votes for women. And thus, I hope, as they grow, they may mature, as I have done, and come to see the world as myself and mother do. We will work on the other things once the most important thing has been achieved, votes for women.
So I have a question here, and it's from Charlotte, who I believe is age 7. She says, when do you think that women will get the vote?
Well, I hope it will be very, very soon. If what is put in mind of the way that men have been franchised, we may, I think, expect there will be some delay. I am looking into the future. I think it perhaps most likely within, I would say, maybe just over a decade from now, in this year of 1906, that at least some women will get the vote, probably property owners. It may, of course, take longer for the full equal franchise, but we will struggle on.
Thank you for your insight into what you think the future will be. So this question from Alison says, what are you doing to promote the rights of working class women, especially those suffering through inequalities in their workplaces?
It is an important question, and it is one that my sisters are very much interested in engaging with. And one day it will be the full focus of my attention. However, until we are in a position where we have equal franchise, until we are able to cast a vote to change the laws, to be part of the political system, everything else is trifles. Votes for women first, and then we can face down inequalities.
Thank you. Okay, so from Amelia, what is your opinion on Queen Victoria and her views on women's rights?
Her late Majesty, Queen Victoria, and I will be cautious and careful, Her late Majesty, Queen Victoria, I think, had she had the company of women such as myself and of my mother, would have come to see the truth of the matter, that women voting was not folly, that women's place was not simply to have many children and be the ministering angel of domestic bliss, that we could be more than that. We could go to university and get law degrees and maybe one day in the future actually use those law degrees to practice law. If only she had had, I think, better friends and counsel.
Thank you. Now, your family were from Manchester, says Alice. What did you think after your first visit to Marble Arch and Speaker's Corner?
Well, I had had quite a lot of experience of political chatter. My mother and father had quite the salon, wherever we lived, of people of all walks of life coming through the doors, talking about political action. And so going to Speaker's Corner and seeing what was happening there, it felt very much like I was in an outside space, like my old living room. It felt like being at home.
Very nice. I've got a couple of questions that are along a similar vein, actually. So, for example, Sylvia and Liz have both asked a similar question, which is that, do you envisage a member of parliament or indeed a female prime minister, so a female member of parliament or female prime minister?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I hope that I will live long enough to see the day when women are granted full franchise and all have the vote. And when that day should come, I myself will run to be a member of parliament. And so thus, of course, I see that one day we will not just have members of parliament who are women, which of course will come first, but surely we will have a female prime minister and women in the House of Lords. And also, of course, why not a female Speaker of the House? Indeed.
Very nice. So a question from Daniela, and just for us to bear in mind that we know that we have some younger viewers on tonight. So Daniela is asking whether there were any women who utilising the soapbox method, using their voices, whether they were imprisoned, killed, or anything terrible like that.
We are aware that our voices and the things we say and our unwillingness to turn away from crying out. After all, did I not experience it myself at that Liberal Party meeting? We went there knowing that we would be imprisoned. We sought it out. We knew we had to create disturbance. We are, I believe, I hope all of us aware that there may be heavy costs in terms of liberty, in terms of physical safety. We do not do this because it is easy. We do it because it must happen.
Thank you. So what do you personally and your movement think of the suffragists? We've got a question on that, and then along a similar line, do you ever work together with the suffragists? So what do you think of them, and do you ever work together with them?
Principally, the suffragettes and the suffragists are fighting for the same thing. We all want franchise, we all want votes. However, I believe fully that every member of my movement would happily work with a suffragist. It is, frankly, the other way around that the nose is being turned up. They think that our methods are unfortunate, criminal, and doing a disservice to the wider statement. And perhaps I would have sympathy if we had not been patiently waiting for 80 years. I do not believe the suffragists to be bad or lazy. I believe that they fundamentally misunderstand how far their patience will go. For they will be patient to the grave and see nothing change. And I, for one, as I said, when I was but a small girl, I turned to my mother, having watched yet another meeting in a room, and said, for years, you have been talking about getting the vote. I, for one, mean to actually get it. Deeds, not words.
Okay, I can see that you're very passionate, obviously. So this is an interesting question that's come in next, which was from Alice. And it says, if your descendants told you that women would get the vote, but then perhaps not turn up to vote, what would you say to them about that?
It is unfathomable to me that any individual would not use their democratic voice, something so hard fought. And yet, a whole part of democracy is the freedom to not use one's voice. I think it's potentially preferential to spoil a ballot paper rather than not turn up to polling booth. But I would not enforce anybody to vote, for that feels like it would perhaps be against the movement in general, but I wish that everybody will.
Thank you. So if you are allowed to practice law one day, from Elizabeth, what area of law would interest you? What would you like to work in?
I think I would like to work in ensuring that everybody gets the fairest deal possible. And thus, perhaps, I would look at property or some such, although you never know what will call you, what might sing out to you as if a song of praise. I have learned many skills, and perhaps I will live long enough, I think, to see a woman practice law, although perhaps by then my life may have taken a different direction.
Okay, so a couple of questions again along similar lines about whether you have tried to enlist the help of enlightened men in your struggle for suffrage, and also whether the men in your own life, so husbands, maybe family members, whether they prevent you or your suffragette sisters from continuing the rebellion. So what sort of role are men playing in your struggle for suffrage?
In my personal struggle, I look to my father as an example. God rest his soul. He died when I was 18 and he is sorely missed. He fostered in all of us a desire to see votes won for women. He was astounded that we were still talking, like myself. He said to my mother, why on earth do you keep talking about it? Why don't you force us to give it to you? We do have many friends who are like-minded. I think, of course, of Keir Hardie, who is a genuinely wonderful man. But while I think my sisters would incorporate him into the movement, he is going down a political path. And this is the issue with including men fully in the WSPU. Women, unlike men, do not have access to walk through the corridors of politics. Men do. And in my experience, the men who seek to use and engage with the WSPU are looking to do so to further their political ends. More so than ever, they would be looking to further the ends of us achieving the vote. And when they are looking to further their political ends, if, for example, somebody starts a Labour Party or co-starts a Labour Party, as my friend Keir Hardie will do, when you are concerned with getting the Labour vote, if you have a group like the WSPU who is concerned with allowing middle and upper class women to get the vote, you may be concerned that that might enfranchise people who won't vote for your party. And thus you will seek to suppress that vote. And that is one of the reasons why we exclude men from it, because ultimately, when it really comes down to it, we frequently find that our ends, our means, and our goals are not the same.
Thank you. Well, we only have just a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to end on this question, which would be, what would be the first thing that you would do if women got the right to vote?
Well, I would celebrate, firstly, and then I would don my party political hat and I would begin to campaign for myself and for my sisters, that we may, as the next step, find ourselves within the halls of power, not just electing those who sit in the seats, that we become the people that sit in those seats. That would be my first step.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Christabel, for giving us this opportunity to speak with you. I'm sure you've got lots of important business that you need to be getting on with. So we shall say goodbye to Christabel. Thank you, Christabel.
Well, I thank you all. Have a very pleasant evening and a safe journey home. And I look forward to seeing you all in Hyde Park very soon. Do take care.
And thank you everyone for joining us this evening and celebrating the 150th anniversary of Speaker's Corner. Thank you so much to the Royal Parks for inviting Zoom Through History to present this to you. And if you enjoyed this evening's Winter Warmer talk, then why not join the Royal Parks final talk taking place this season? It's happening in March, and it follows on very nicely from this talk because it's all about women in horticulture. So you can find out more information by heading to the Royal Parks website, search for Winter Warmers online talks. So all that's left is to say thank you very much everybody for joining us, and we wish you a great rest of your evening. Thank you everybody and good night.